This was one of the scariest things that ever happened to me. I was 19 or 20, kayaking with a friend in the fog on a remote pond. He had a cheap inflatable kayak, the same one as my parents', and we'd take them out sometimes. The evening this happened, heavy fog was rolling in and settling out on the water. No swimmers, no boats, just us. We'd been out there for a while, and the fog had completely covered the pond. Generally, we'd been sort of drifting around together, just talking. I'd never been kayaking before with the fog the way it was that evening. It was wild. It muffled everything, and once you were out there, the shoreline just disappeared. I remember being blown away by how it felt so alone out there, enveloped in it. I'd paddle and think I was still next to him, but then I'd hear his voice faint like he was farther off than I thought. Over time, we just kind of drifted apart to go explore and do our own thing. It really felt like being on another planet. I was just kind of taking it all in when suddenly, out of the blue, I heard splashing. I lifted my paddle out of the water to get a better listen. The first thought that went through my head was that maybe it was a loon or some other kind of bird that got freaked out after being surprised by my friend, but it was way too aggressive. There wasn't any reason I could think of that would justify the level of thrashing around that I was hearing. Then came muffled yelling. It was my friend. I spun my kayak toward the sound and started paddling as hard as I could in the direction I had heard him call out. I remember this deep feeling of panic setting in because I could tell something was wrong by what I was hearing, but I couldn't see anything, so my imagination was filling in all the blanks with horrible things. I didn't know what I was paddling into. It took maybe a full minute or so before I saw him. He was in the water a little ways out from the shore with his kayak tipped, clinging to the side and kicking to stay up. He was looking off into the woods. Aside from the beach and boat launch, the wood line went right down to the edge of the water the entire way around the pond. Between the evening setting in, the fog, and the darkness of the woods, I couldn't see anything beyond the edge of the tree line. As I got closer, it looked like he had capsized himself somehow. I half expected him to be laughing, but he wasn't. He wasn't saying anything, just staring into the woods. I helped him get his kayak upright, and he was able to climb back in, but he was like breathing heavy and super pale. He looked terrified. As soon as he was in his kayak, he was whispering to me that someone had tipped him over. At first, I thought he meant me, like he thought I'd clipped him or something, but he kept saying no, he knew it wasn't me. He said he'd been gliding along the shallows next to the shoreline, and completely out of nowhere, someone ran out from the woods, came straight down waist deep into the water, and started grabbing and pulling at him until his kayak flipped over with him inside it, upside down underwater. He said the guy tried to hold him under, but that he'd been able to kick out and come back up for air, and that the guy just ran out of the water and back into the trees. I felt like I couldn't even catch up to the situation. I had to ask him to repeat it so I could wrap my head around it. He wasn't making it up. We both sat there, quiet, listening, staring toward the edge of the woods through the fog. That's when we heard it. Movement from the tree line. The faint snaps of twigs, the sound of someone walking through the forest. Whoever it was in there watching us. We looked at each other and knew going back to the boat launch was a bad idea. It was the only clear spot on the lake to pull the kayaks out, which meant if someone wanted to trap us or do harm, that's where they'd know to wait. I had no idea what this person's deal was, but the way my friend described the situation, it sounded like someone who clearly had bad intentions. We agreed without even really talking it through. Cross the pond and get out on the opposite side. That was the only way we could outpace this person. So we started paddling. In the background, you could hear whoever it was crashing through the woods like they were trying to keep pace with us. We got to the shallows, jumped out, dragged the kayaks up on the bank, and just left them there. Didn't care if we lost them. Our only thought was to get to the road. That meant bushwhacking through wet woods in near dark, up the hill, away from the water. When we finally hit the main road to the pond access, it was empty and quiet. My friend had left his phone in the car, but I had mine and I called the cops. They said to wait near the road until an officer could meet us. That's when it got even scarier. While we waited, a vehicle came creeping up the road from the boat launch, lights off, moving slow. It was some old beater you could barely make out. We scrambled off the road into a ditch, crouching in the brush and listening as it drove by. But that wasn't it. As we climbed back up onto the road, it came back down. You could tell it was the same car by how the belt was squealing. We hopped back over the embankment and hid as it went by again. The car turned around at the boat launch one more time and came back up the road, slow like it was looking for us. Then it was gone. Eventually, the police showed up. We flagged them down and told them what happened. They took us back around to the launch where we'd parked, got our statements, and said they'd check the area. Obviously, they didn't find anyone. They asked if we wanted to file a full report, but it felt pointless. We didn't even get a good look at the guy or the car. There was no reasonable explanation for what had happened. Who runs out of the trees and down into the water, then tries to drown someone, and then drives up and down the road with their lights off? There was no way to know for sure if it was the same person, but it must have been. They had their lights off and went out and back from the boat launch 3 times. I don't know exactly what they were doing, but it sure seemed like they wanted to make sure we didn't get out. I don't know why it is, I've just never been the type to get spooked, but this experience remains my exception to the rule. This was a couple years ago, 2023 I think. I was driving alone out of state trying to get back home. I live in the South and I'd been up in New England for a job. I hate flying and lucky for me I need my truck for work, even long distance jobs, so I had driven all the way up and was heading back. This was late fall, and the fog that night was worse than anything I dealt with down south, almost to the point where I was considering pulling over and waiting it out. My high beams only made it worse, and it felt like I could barely see past the hood of my truck, just total whiteout. I had a map app going, but my cell lost signal somewhere between the mountains after leaving the highway to cut across some roads that would put me on the interstate. I quit and restarted the app, which was my fatal mistake because it wouldn't reconnect. My navigation had gone completely blind. One wrong turn led to another, and suddenly I was on a dirt road. Just hard-packed dirt with trees on both sides and the damn fog. I figured if I just kept going straight long enough, it would eventually have to spit me out onto a bigger road or pavement, but that didn't happen. Instead, I realized I'd been driving like that for almost 20 minutes without seeing another car. I had slowed down considerably to try and restart my phone, hoping it would jumpstart my signal, when suddenly headlights appeared behind me, cutting through the fog. I was relieved, thinking finally there's another driver, I must be on track to get somewhere. But then, the lights flashed. It was a cop. It definitely struck me as odd given the fact that I felt like we were in the middle of absolute nowhere, and I hadn't been doing anything wrong as far as I could tell. But I also needed help getting out of there, so the blue lights seemed more like a blessing than a curse. I was already basically pulled over anyway, but I got over onto the dirt embankment as best I could, put it in park, and waited. The car rolled to a stop behind me. Then the driver's door opened and someone got out. I could barely tell it was a woman by the way the headlights lit up her hair. She slowly made her way up to my window, stopping to peek over the side into the bed of my truck. No hat, no real uniform, just khakis and a dark jacket with something clipped on the front. She motioned for me to put down the window, so I cracked it. Then she asked for my license and registration. I asked her why she pulled me over. She just repeated herself, nothing else. I assumed she would get to the point eventually, so I handed them over. She stepped back behind my truck and looked at my license plate, then back at me. Then she said something like, "You're not from here." It was obvious information. My plates were out of state, my license and registration had my address and home state on them, so I didn't understand why she had even said it. And the way she said it made it sound like I'd done something wrong. I told her I was heading back south, just trying to get to the interstate to leave. Then she came back up to the window and started asking weird questions, not traffic stop questions. Did I follow politics? What did I think about certain laws? She tried to make it seem like it was all just part of a natural pullover conversation, but it definitely wasn't. She was like trying to categorize me or something. The whole line of questioning was just totally bizarre, and all of it was driving in this roundabout way toward like figuring out who I had voted for or something. This woman woman was incredibly strange. She didn't know how to speak to other people. I can't remember everything, just that it didn't make sense for a cop to be asking me any of it. I've been pulled over before, and cops just don't start asking you about your personal views on things. I could tell she was getting pissed off every time I tried to evade her questions. I kept giving her answers like, "I'm just passing through," or "I don't really talk politics, sorry." But it felt like she kept trying to pin me down or make me say something she was fishing for. At some point, she turned to her vehicle and the light from her headlights illuminated her badge and drew my attention to it. It wasn't real. You could clearly see it was cheap plastic, like something off eBay. I could also see that she had a firearm holstered at her side. I directly asked her if she was with the state police or some other law enforcement agency. There was a pause, but then she didn't deny it. She just told me that she lived in the area and was part of a group that were responsible for protecting her community. Let that sink in. Not law enforcement, just some random person out there with a firearm, fake badge, and blue light pulling people over as they saw fit. That was the moment it hit me how bad this was. I didn't let on how disturbing I found this, and I politely asked for my license and registration back. She didn't give them back. She said she was going to finish asking me questions first. The way she said it was completely calm, like she felt totally comfortable exerting this made-up authority over me. The fog made everything worse. It felt like we were in a bubble and I was trapped with her, just her and me in the middle of nowhere. Then, like an honest-to-God miracle, headlights showed up again in the fog. Another car was coming from behind us way down the road. The woman stiffened up as soon as she saw it. She muttered something I couldn't hear, handed me back my license and registration, then just turned and jogged back to her vehicle, jumped in, slammed the door, and peeled out. The other car slowed down behind me and rolled to a stop. It was just some regular guy in a sedan. He asked if I was okay, said he saw the lights ahead and wondered if there had been an accident. I told him what had happened and that I was lost. He gave me directions and offered to let me follow him back toward the main highway. I thanked him and followed his taillights out until I finally got cell signal again. I don't know what she would have done if that other car hadn't shown up. I don't know if her gun was real or if that was also fake. All I know is she wasn't a cop, she wasn't law enforcement of any kind, and she had no reason to pull me over. No idea if there were actually a group of people like she said, or if she just took it upon herself to be some sort of vigilante or something. But she seemed to really believe she was out there doing some sort of duty. In her head, she actually thought she was doing something noble. That's the scariest part. People like that don't know they're crazy. They think they're right. I was part of the volunteer search and rescue crew in my old town for about 6 years before I moved. Smaller coastal place, not tiny, but everyone kind of knew each other through 1 or 2 degrees. Most people there either fish, work the ferry, or deal with tourism in the summer. Search and rescue wasn't a huge operation, just locals with boats and gear and a couple guys who had actual training. Most of the time it was nothing, helping someone who ran out of gas or some tourist who didn't read the tides right. This one night, the weather was nasty. The fog had come in real bad, which wasn't unusual, but I'm talking like can't see 50 feet in front of you thick, which on top of some light to moderate rain had made it pretty ugly. We got a call that a small boat had struck rocks just offshore. We didn't know the full extent of it, but we were told it was bad. Apparently, people in the area had seen strange lights near the shoreline. Nobody knew if it was survivors signaling or what, but the call was enough for the crew to mobilize. We got out there with headlamps and flashlights, splitting up along different stretches of beach and combing to see if we could spot anyone. I got paired with a couple other guys at first, but the way the beach curves around, it's easy to lose sight of each other, especially with the fog, rain, and rock formations. I ended up further up the beach by myself, climbing up a big hill that completely split the beach in two, part rocky outcrop, part dunes. That's when I saw it. Through a break in the fog, just far enough up the shoreline, I could see an orange glow. My first thought was signal fire from the crew that had wrecked, so I started heading toward it. The closer I got though, the less it felt right. The fire wasn't small, it was big, almost like a bonfire. and I could see figures around it moving back and forth, distorted, foggy silhouettes that were like warping with the flicker of the firelight. At first I was relieved, people were alive, but then I noticed what they were doing. They weren't huddled for warmth or waving for help. They were actively feeding the fire, tossing in what looked like driftwood and chunks of broken boards from a big pile. I could smell kerosene. The flames were huge, way brighter than anything you'd need for signaling. And the position of it wasn't in a safe clearing. It was right in line with one of the most dangerous rock beds along the coast. From out on the water, in thick fog and rain, it would very easily look like a guide to shore, except it would bring you straight into the rocks. I stopped approaching and just watched, trying to understand what the hell was happening. These were terrible weather conditions, and there was no reason anyone would be out here having some sort of bonfire party or something. There were 3 of them that I could make out, 2 by the fire, 1 off to the side by the pile of unburnt wood. That figure was pouring something on the pile. For those of you who don't know, there's a thing in coastal places called wrecking. It comes from an older time when people lured ships onto the rocks so they'd crash, and then they could steal the cargo. I'm not saying that's what this was necessarily, because that was like historical stuff, something centuries ago. But watching them, I realized this was basically the same thing right in front of me. They were either total idiots or deliberately building a massive fire right on the shoreline to lure ships into the rocks. I was maybe 20 yards away from these people, maybe less, basically where the woods faded out and the beach began. They hadn't seen me yet, and I didn't know if I should try to radio someone or just run back to the others and notify them. While I was standing there thinking through it, I heard something behind me and turned around. Someone came out of the trees behind me. They were carrying an armful of branches. I hadn't even heard them until they were practically on top of me. They stopped cold when they saw me standing there just a couple yards away. Then they said a name. I don't remember what it was, but from his tone, it sounded like he was asking to confirm if I was this person. Neither of us could see much about the other person, just that we were both dark figures. I didn't say anything. And then I saw him look over and basically clock how many people were by the fire. I think this is when he realized I wasn't one of his friends. That's when he dropped the wood and lunged at me. He must have pieced it together and was panicking that they'd been found out. He grabbed the front of my jacket and started pulling, like he was trying to drag me toward the fire and his friends. Then he started yelling out to them. I just went into total survival mode, and I got him with an elbow somewhere in the face. He let go long enough for me to slip out and start running. I could hear at least him behind me, if not all of them, until I was halfway down the hill, shouting and running back toward my crew. We were completely spread out at that point, so I sprinted back the way I'd come quite a ways until I saw flashlights down the beach. I must have looked insane, out of breath, rambling about a fire and people trying to drag me. We all gathered together and went back in force. By the time we got there, the fire was still burning, but the people were gone, just vanished into the fog. There was a big stack of mixed wood nearby. I don't know how they had gotten it all out there. There was a can of kerosene tossed off toward the woods. The boat we'd been called about had been run ashore and ditched. The people were safe, but shook up. Later, the guys who had crashed told us about how the light and glare had pulled them in, basically confirming everything I had thought. In the weeks after, I asked around a little. Nobody admitted to knowing anything. I read more about wrecking and how sometimes it wasn't even about stealing cargo. Sometimes people just wanted to cause damage or had their own twisted reasons. What's so disturbing too is how small the community is. It's not some faceless town where strangers come and go every day. The people at that fire were locals, maybe even people I'd stood behind at the grocery store. They just went back to their lives after that night, blending in like nothing had happened. And for all I know, they're still there to this day.